sharing your screen, Ramon, and yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you so much. Ramon, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for a presentation. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Ivan for organizing this and for inviting me to this short presentation on, well, on predatory practices and on ethics. I work on the field of ethics, so my expertise come a little bit from this side, and at the same time I've been editing an open access journal, a Diamond open access journal from my university, so it's funded by public money with no cost for authors. And my interest in this topic became a little bit from this side, from working as an editor on a journal. And I think we all have had experience with some of the journals, and topic is becoming more and more complex, as we will see today, since the definitions are quite general, and at the same time there are different kind of journals. But let me please start with an example and with a small anecdote. When I was starting to prepare this presentation, I hope my PowerPoint is well, that you can see it in the screen. When I was preparing this for this seminar, after my holidays, I came back, and in the morning, 9:42 in the morning, I received a nice email invitation from a journal I've never heard before, International Journal of Arts and Social Sciences. And here I got an invitation for writing a paper. And I thought, okay, it's a good way of starting this seminar. In the description of this email, obviously, there are some key concepts about how important this journal is, and that it is an international journal with high quality research that looks for novel research and creative research. And at the same time, you can see some
Sorry, Ramon, sorry to interrupt you. Could you please use the full view? Yeah, mode. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Now? Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivan. So in the same website, there are some details that, well, there could be a bit suspicious. If I got this email 24th of August, second day after my holidays, and they were asking me to deliver, to submit a paper 30th of August. So that meant that I had 6 days for writing a paper. And the acceptation process would then last for 5-6 days, and the finally publication will come a bit later. 10 September paper would already been published. Obviously, we all work in different fields. I'm from the fields of humanities and social sciences, where normally this takes much longer period, and in all the fields, I think it takes much longer period than only these few days. Normally in my field, it takes 2-3 months before you have the first news about the submission of a paper. Okay, but I started to work then after, there was one of the first emails I got after my holidays, and I thought, okay, now I have a small dilemma. What can I do? What should I do? Should I write this paper in 5-6 days and having a new publication on my CV on 10th of September, or shall I still invest some time in preparing the topic of today for pages? Only a few days later, actually 6 days later, I received another email, very similar to this previous email, from another journal that I had not heard before, International Journal of Latest Research on Humanities and Social Sciences. It sounds very good as well. Nice title. And again, the description is, quite interesting. It's a peer-reviewed journal, interdisciplinary, international. It looks for excellent papers. Actually, the concept of excellence appears in 2 occasions in the same email. And it publishes articles on very different topics in the field of social sciences and humanities. In this occasion, again, the deadlines were, not very, they were quite close again. This occasion, with a bit more of days, I could deliver the paper 15th of September. So that meant that I had a few weeks for writing the paper. And the notification of acceptance here, we read only notification of acceptance in 2 days, which, well, today sound bit fast in order to do a peer review and to really give some feedback to a paper. And then the publication was, again, very, very fast. So in this case, I had not only one dilemma, I had 2 dilemmas. What should I do? Should I prepare the presentation for pages, or should I write 2 papers and get 2 new publications in my CV during the first days after my holidays? Well, normally in my field, it's quite standard to publish 2, 3, 4 articles a year, maybe sometimes a bit more or sometimes a bit less, but it's difficult to publish many articles a year, since you need a lot of time for first writing them and then going through all the process of peer review. As we all know, it takes time, it's difficult, but at the end, the results normally are much better, especially because the peer review process is a serious peer review process. And in this case, there were some elements that, well, I could doubt if it was really a serious process or not. And well, when we read the definitions of what a predatory journal is, it's a complex topic, and the definition is not always the same, but normally there are some features, some characteristics that are quite constant in some of these journals. The first of all, the most important element starts actually with this kind of emails. The email that you receive in order to, well, to trying to get articles normally have some elements that could be suspicious. They normally send emails to many authors, so sometimes mentioning previous research, some other times just asking for new papers. And this is quite a common characteristic of these articles. Normally we can see, of this journal, sorry, some false claims in this journals as well. Normally these false claims are linked to metrics. They normally say that they are very high ranked in different metrics and different rankings. And if you then go to these rankings or to these platforms, to these indexes, you go to Scopus, Clarivate, and so forth, you see that this information is not true. Sometimes the websites are not very well done, or the grammar is not the best. Some other characteristic is the one that we already have been seeing. I mean, the times for the process of peer review is completely unrealistic. It's impossible to really get so fast feedback on a paper. And another aspect that is important to look at is the contact information of the editorial board and in general of the journal. It is, well, it is misleading many times and suspicious or with lack of information. So it's another part where I think authors and academics should always have a good look at. There is another element which is important to see, linked to the title of these journals. And normally some of these predatory journals use very similar titles to other journals which are very well known, well established, and which are, well, good journals with good reputation in their fields. So they normally change some letters or some elements, and that can bring some confusion to the academics. We can see sometimes, for instance, some journals with almost identical titles. We can see here 2 examples of a journal. The one that we have at the downside of the PowerPoint is a well-known journal, Acta Psychologica. It's indexed in Clarivate, Scopus, and other places. But we see another journal again with some elements that could make us a bit suspicious about the characteristics of these publishers, or this journal in this case, and publisher, obviously. The title changes only a few letters. If you then look to the indexes, it doesn't fit what you can find in this in Scopus, for instance, or in Clarivate. Again, the average of acceptation, the period is very, very short. Normally, predatory journals, well, and there's a big discussion always about the link with open access and predatory journals, although it's very important to know that there are different things. It's not, I mean, open journals are legitimate journals with peer review process and good quality. Predatory journals are making bad use of open access and using the reputation of these well-established journals. So we see some of these characteristics, which makes quite easy to detect which ones are predatory and which are not. At the same time, and we can have fast looks on some of the tools which are useful for identifying or verifying some of the journals. And many times you receive an email, you have doubts, so you can go to these links and then have a much better idea. One interesting blog, for instance, is Predatory Reports. Here you can find a list of predatory journals. Sometimes you don't find exactly the same one that has sent you an email, but many times they have quite the same characteristics or almost the same titles that some that are in this list. So this is quite useful to use when you have doubts about where to publish a paper or one of these emails that you might have received. There is another website which I think is very useful, which is called Think, Check, and Submit. In this case, you receive a checklist with different questions. And if you follow the different questions, you would recognize quite clearly if you are in front of a trusted publisher or trusted journal or not. They have different sections, not only on journals, as well on books. This website is very easy to follow and very useful for academics and researchers when they have doubts about this. Well, then, I think one of the key questions that we can debate today is if it is always obvious and easy to spot this kind of publisher or this kind of journals. And here we have to be aware that it is not always easy, and that as Jeffrey Bell, the author, the librarian and scientist that developed the first list of predatory journals and created the concept of predatory publishers, predatory journals, sorry, as said, it is not an exact science. It is not like mathematics. There are, at the same time, what he calls borderline journals. Some other academics speak about gray journals. I mean, journals that are not 100% predatory, we could say, or they don't fit in all the features of a predatory journal, but that they are very far from the well-established and legitimate journals. Some of them, for instance, are quite useful in getting good editorial boards, or at least they do good work with the indexes, for instance. But the peer review process are not so transparent or not so trustworthy. So we are now in a much more difficult field of publications where authors can really make mistakes, or at least don't have a clear idea about what journals are legitimate and which ones are not. Here, I think it's very useful one report that we will know in a few minutes much more about this, since our colleague Asrat has worked on this report. It's a report made by inter-academic partnerships, and they use a concept which I think is quite important to be aware of, which is the idea of a spectrum of predatory behaviors. So we have the journals that are fully fraudulent, we have the good journals, and in the middle there are many other possibilities and many other kind of journals. And we can identify them with different kind of characteristics and behaviors. I think this concept is very, very relevant, and it makes this topic much more complex and the discussion much more complex. Even more difficult was the last news that we got from Clarivate in March. You probably know this, where at the moment that 82 journals, I think it was over 80 journals, got delisted from Clarivate and from the Journal Citation Report in 2023. This was even more complex since in this case, and if we read what Clarivate was saying, they were showing big concern about the integrity of the scholar publication. Sorry. It's interesting to read the explanation of why these journals were delisted. There were 500 monitored, and at the end, over 80 delisted from this index. And this was affecting different publishers. It was not only from one publisher, it was from different publishers. We can see here a list. Some of these publishers had quite a few of journals delisted, and some of them had not many journals delisted, but they had some journals with a lot of publications. For instance, International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. It's one of this list of these journals that was affected. It was a journal where more Spanish academics had published in the years before, and one of the journals that has published more articles in the last years in general. So they have a very big amount of publications. For instance, Spanish authors only in the period of 2017-2022 with more than 5,000 articles being published here. So we are speaking about a very important publication, which has been delisted for 2023. But as I said, this has been affecting to different publishers, Elsevier, Springer, Sage, and so on. So what do we learn from this? We learn that the topic of when a journal is a respectable journal or not is much more complex. It's not only the fraudulent journals that we are speaking of. There are other journals in between. There are other gray areas where sometimes it's not clear when we are speaking about the predatory or not, or where there are discussions about whether it is or not. And this makes the ethical discussion, which I think is an interesting topic, well, a key issue at the same time. And I think one aspect that we can discuss is what are the reasons behind, how can we understand that some academics publish in this kind of journals? Obviously, this question we cannot answer in the same way if we are speaking about one journal which is 100% fraudulent and predatory, or another journal which is a little bit in between. And then, obviously, there are structural reasons as well. We know that this has been studied by many scholars, the culture of the pressure for publishing, the idea that we need to publish, the idea of publish or perish has an influence, obviously, on this. But if we look at the individual level, what are the reasons behind each scholar for deciding to publish in here? We can open the discussion and we can see different options. One option is, well, sometimes it happens because some scholars are unaware of this. They have no knowledge about the different kind of publications, and then they receive one of these emails. Maybe they are very happy because they are getting some attention. Academics, we love to have attention. We love to be liked by others. And if they say, look, your research is more interesting, please submit another paper. And then they promise very short periods of peer review, maybe we get convinced for doing this. When this happens and we are not aware of this, well, then the ethical discussion is a bit different, right? In these cases, we need to, well, do what we are doing in this webinar, say, be careful, you have to read very well, where are you publishing, why are you publishing there, and what are the consequences of publishing. Another aspect, or very different, is the question when someone publishes here because they want to take some shortcuts, when the reason is just the ambition, when you want to have more titles on your CV, and you are aware of the consequences and the elements that are behind this kind of publications, then the ethical discussion becomes very different. It's not the same as in the option one. And here we can have many discussions and look at from very different sides. But I think one interesting exercise would be, what would be the answer if we look at from two different ways of moral reasoning? We can do it from a categorical moral reasoning, which is the proposal of authors that consider that the most important aspect when we think of morality is linked to the duties and the rights, I mean, to the universal obligations that we have in this case as researchers. In this case, we would look to the moral behavior and if something is well done or not, looking more to the actions and not so much to the consequences. This would be one way of reflecting on this. Another way, completely different, would be thinking much more on the consequentialist side. I mean, what are the consequences of one decision? Are we generating a better society, or are we generating common good, or is it not the best thinking, not only in the act, but thinking in this case only in the consequences? We can approach this ethical question from these two perspectives, but probably we will get more or less the same answer with different reasons. If we use the categorical moral reasoning on what are the moral obligations that we have, the universal obligations that we have as academics, well, then we can look at different instruments. For instance, the code of good practices that we have at different universities, at European levels, international level. There are plenty of codes of good practices where it is defined which are the common values or common principles that should define science or should define research. And here we normally find some of these principles that we see here from the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, which has been just revised by ALEA. And we see here principles like honesty, respect, accountability, among others. Obviously, publishing in this kind of journals bring into discussion these principles. If we try to find these shortcuts, if we are trying to, well, to cheat a little bit on the system, are we really respecting our colleagues, or are we trying just to get more, well, a bigger CV without really deserving it? Are we really being honest with the other, or even being honest with yourself when we are publishing in this kind of journals? This is the kind of questions that we would address if we adopt a categorical moral reasoning. If we adopt the other way of reasoning, the consequentialist moral reasoning, well, the discussion would be a bit different, but probably, as I said before, the conclusion would be quite similar. If we think of the consequence to oneself, it may be considered at the beginning like a small victory. Well, I have now 2 more publications because I didn't prepare my presentation for page, so I have 2 more publications to write on my list of publications. So I could consider, in case I would answer to that dilemma I started before, opting for publishing in these journals, I would say, well, my CV now looks much better, and maybe this looks like a victory in the short term, but this is actually not real. I mean, it has a negative effect on a long term, especially because it affects the credibility of a research and the reputation. And at the end, this is what we can discuss about this. One of the most important elements one academic has is the reputation and the credibility. If some academic loses the reputation and credibility, he is in big trouble. Then we can think the same time, not only at an individual level, but on a collective level, on a common level. I mean, when we are publishing in this kind of journals, we are wasting resources, we are investing money, we are paying for a publication that is not of a high quality. And this discussion is, well, it's a discussion not only for the fraudulent, predatory 100% journals, but it can be open to other journals which are suspicious. We are wasting money. And in the case, for instance, my university, which is a public university, we are wasting public funds. This has at the same time a reputational damage for the institution. The reputation at university, is a key issue as well, not only for researchers. And even if we look a bit further than that, it could be a threat for the credibility of academia. If we are publishing things that have not been reviewed, which is not considered as serious by the academia or the rest of the colleagues, or directly, if we are publishing things which are not serious and which are just fake, well, we can have a problem, and the society could lose their credibility towards the academia. I would like just to end with one example of reputational damage. When Clarivate decided to delist the different journals that we saw before, some of the scholars in Spain with work on the field of documentation, they have made a list in a report called Unfolding Journals, in which they ranked the universities that have been publishing the highest number of articles in this suspicious journal or delisted journals. And they have not only doing this, they have calculated as well how much money this has cost to the pockets, to the budget of universities. And they have made the list in a positive and a negative sense. So which are the universities that have been publishing more in this kind of policies, and which are the universities that have been publishing less in this kind of journals, or these journals that were delisted from Calibate. You can see the green are the ones that have been publishing less, and the red the ones that have been publishing more. So this has a reputational impact as well to university. So we have to think, and that would be my conclusion, on different aspects. One is on what are our moral obligations as academics, which is the duty of the science and the academics in this field. And at the other side are the consequences of publishing in this kind of publications. I hope this was understandable. Thanks a lot for your attention. I stay here for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Ramon. Very interesting. Particularly, I found, very, very useful. I mean, particularly for early career researchers, the website, the Think, Check, and Submit, I think, was the name, and certainly is very useful, and also the aspects. I mean, you are as a philosopher, the aspect that you mentioned about our responsibility with the society, not only with our peers. I mean, what do we do with the money, with the public money that funds our jobs when we are in the public sector? But yeah, we can discuss more about it after Asfat's talk. So now Asfat will speak more about his perspective as part of the inter-academic partnership, and also combating predatory academic journals. Asfa, the microphone is yours. Please share your screen in the full view. Looking forward to seeing your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ivan, and thank you, everyone, and good afternoon or good morning. And thank you, Ramon, for the nice presentation. Obviously, I'll be repeating some of them, as you have also mentioned in one of your slides. So, can you hear me? Is my sound audible?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Yeah, so I'm going to take you through a study that we conducted in 2022. I mean, at least the report was published in March 2022. And it's about combating predatory academic journals and conference, which is a bit different from Ramon's presentation. Is we also think, or we also thought at the time, and we have found out that it was true, that predatory conferences are also becoming very serious problems along with predatory journals. So the study was conducted by the Inter-Academy Partnership, which is basically a global partnership of over 140 national and regional merit-based academies of science, engineering, and medicine. So it was, high time for that Inter-Academy Partnership to go into much detail about the predatory behaviors, because it has been becoming really serious from their perspective. So this project was funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, so I have to acknowledge that. And this was having an objective, very clear objectives of the study, which include defining predatory and unethical practice in academic journals and conference. As Ramon also said, the definition is very fluid. So we want to come up with something that can be workable for everyone who is discussing or working on predatory academic behaviors, and then to gauge their prevalence and impact, and to understand the primary drivers, that means the root cause. Again, in the ethics discussion or presentation, Ramon touched upon that, but I'll go into further detail in one of the slides towards the end. And to examine the efforts to date to combat predatory journals and conference around the world, and then, of course, provide very concrete recommendations for addressing the problem, rather than just discussing it and leaving it open-ended. We want also to give some practical recommendations to combat these predatory behaviors. And of course, the study had stakeholders as participants, or at least in a dialogue that we conducted. And this included basically the whole publishing enterprise, starting from, of course, the researchers that are in universities and research administrators, then obviously research community and academics, then the libraries and indexing service and publishers themselves, public and private sector funders of research, and obviously the end users, which are basically the policy makers, because our research in one way or the other is going to end up in some kind of practice, and that's going to be taken by the policymakers. So the study basically covered all this spectrum of the publishing enterprise. And as I said, this was conducted by, a working group, and I was a member of that working group. And this is a really international team from all over the world. And it also represents all the disciplines. Not all the disciplines, but at least the major disciplines in the research enterprise, that's in science, social sciences, and humanities. So what are the common features of predatory journals and conference? As I said earlier, it's not that easy to define a predatory journal or a predatory behavior or a predatory conference, but at least there are some key indicators of whether that is predatory or not. So Ramon, again, very well explained with an example of his experience, the major feature of a predatory practice, a predatory journal or conference. So they solicit articles from researchers through practice that exploit the pressure on researchers to publish and present their work. So they will tell you that basically we'll publish your work in no time, in few days, and that's it. And you pay some amount of money and you'll have a paper that will be included in your CV. Well, not only from ethical, but from practical point of view, that's going to be problematic to the person, as you'll see later, but that is basically how they exploit the researchers, basically. And some features include the major features, at least: rapid pay to publish or present models without rigorous or indeed any peer review in some case, or in most cases, if it's a really fraudulent journal, then fake editorial or conference boards falsely listing respected scientists, or fraudulent impact factors or metrics, and the journal and conference titles that are deceptively similar to legitimate ones. Again, an example was given by Ramon earlier. And aggressive spam invitations solicit articles and abstracts, including outside of a researcher's own expertise. Just to give you an idea, there are times in a week that I receive maybe 4 or 5, or sometimes even 2 a day, and they are very, very persistent. They don't just let go. They just repeatedly email you, spam you, and you can know that this is, a behavior of a fraudulent or at least a predatory journal. And this genuinely fraudulent practice continue to evolve and are becoming more difficult to distinguish between low quality, unethical, and questionable publishing and conferencing practice. So they are so sophisticated that they now infiltrate even the quality journals, as we'll see later. So predatory journal is one thing, but predatory behavior is becoming an important thing to deal with. So the study included a literature review. So we tried to see most of the published, at least, the major ones in predatory behaviors, mostly in journals. Conferences are just becoming more and more important recently. And it also included stakeholder dialogue. We wanted to hear the sectoral perspectives, their insights, their motivations from all the stakeholders I mentioned earlier and are indicated here, and also to explore practicable and effective recommendations for each sector. And this will also give a possibility to pave the way for dissemination and uptake of recommendations. Once we come up with the report, it will be easier, or it was easier, basically, because this is something done in the past, to disseminate it to the stakeholders, because these stakeholders were involved right from the very beginning in the study. And one thing that we did differently, and which is one major original contribution to the study of predatory behaviors, is that we conducted a landmark survey on predatory academic practice, and this covered all over. This was, responded by researchers and academicians from all sectors, from all over the world. And we received a total of 1,872 from a total of 112 countries. So the survey response was really very, very, I would say important. The numbers involved, or the researchers involved in the study were really was a significant number. And what's interesting is over 80% of the respondents perceive that predatory practices are a serious problem, or they are on the rise in their country of work. So that means one of the major problems that we will see again later, and was mentioned by Ramón, is that awareness is a major issue. But it looks that, at least in the recent past, the awareness is becoming more and more significant, the awareness about predatory behavior, obviously. And at least 24%, nearly a quarter of the respondents have either published, this is a major result, in a predatory journal, participated in a predatory conference, or do not know if they have participated in a conference of predatory nature or published in a predatory journal. So they were not aware at the time. So the reasons given by this 24% is that they were not aware at the time when they were publishing their paper in that predatory journal or participated in that predatory conference, or they needed to advance their career. And it was faster, easier, or cheaper option for some of them. And they were encouraged by their peers. That means peers who already published basically were, kind of encouraging them to publish. So these are some of the, the major results that we get out of this 24%. I'll not go into the details, but some of them also gave us specific details of how they were involved in that. So these quotations are basically from the comments from the respondents. And why is it important to address a predatory journal or conference? Because over 90% of the respondents think that predatory practice should be combated. That is to preserve the integrity of and public trust in research, and of course to ensure that research informing policy is rigorous. So even those who responded that they published in predatory journals or participated in predatory conference indicated that they should be combated. And if left unchallenged, obviously, the majority of respondents believe predatory practice will have detrimental effects because they fuel misinformation in public policy. We have seen this actually during the COVID, because there were lots of papers coming out without much peer review. And that was just to, kind of brought the data out there. But of course, some of them, if they are not peer reviewed, obviously will have a good amount of implication in misinforming public policy. And they infiltrate and undermine the research enterprise, or they widen the research gap between high-income and low-income countries. This is a major issue because obviously the predatory journals have low, let's say, compared to the good journals, good quality journals, some of them are open access, obviously, the good quality journals, but most predatory journals exploit the pay to publish model of publishing. That means they basically receive money for publishing. So when people have only $200, they can publish it in a predatory journal, while the major open access journals, the good quality ones, are, asking for thousands of dollars. So that means there will be a major research gap between the high income and low income countries because of the proliferation of these predatory journals. And this is a very, very serious issue, especially in the global south. And other survey headlines include that researchers at all career stages need to be on their guard, because it's not only early career researchers, or it's not only researchers from the low-income countries, but it is researchers who are at their senior level or at advanced level who were also, responding that they have published at least once in predatory journals among the 24% that I indicated. And of course, researchers in low and middle income countries are more vulnerable for the reasons I indicated earlier. And some disciplines are more vulnerable than others. It's usually researchers in arts and humanities which are affected more by predatory journals. Well, that also includes science journals, but we see in the response that it's more in the humanities and art side. While researchers in transdisciplinary and engineering science are affected more by predatory conference. And at least 14% of respondents admit they have used a predatory journal or conference. So that is really very, very big number, because the implication is that over 1.2 million researchers of the nearly 9 million researchers around the world who could have used predatory outlets. That means billions of dollars of research costs in terms of human resource, in terms of materials, in terms of time, and this is wasted as a result. And obviously this requires urgent attention. Again, Ramon gave a good example of the Spanish universities in terms of the journals that are delisted because they have some predatory behavior. So you could see I could see from the tables that this is very huge amount of money which is wasted because of publishing in a predatory journal. And well, we also asked the researchers what are the most revealing signs that they consider these are predatory journals. Well, the invitation to submit a paper is in a subject matter outside my expertise. Or the others say the invitation is not very focused and the language is odd, sometimes grammatically incorrect. The conference and journal has an unusual combination of words in the name. The invitation is very flattering, or they keep sending me invitations over and over again. So these are basically a good telltale signs for knowing that this is a predatory journal. Again, Ramon also mentioned about the tools out there, that this is more systematic because there is think, check, submit, and there is also think, check, attend for conference. The one is for journals. There is what we call author aid, and there is stop predatory journals. Then the cabels, although this is paywalled, that means you have to pay to see whether a journal is listed as a predatory journal or not. The DOAJ, which is the Directory of Open Access Journals, COP, which is the Committee on Publishing Ethics, and there are many, many others, but these are the ones which are now getting a lot of attention in terms of identifying predatory journals. There are also some universities, for example, in Canada, which are more systematic, and they have a kind of a center for journalogy where they list or where they give you ideas how to identify predatory journals. So already there are some tools that you can use when you are I'm sorry, there is some sound.
Yeah, okay. Asfa, I think you can continue now.
Okay, good. So one of the major results of this study was trying to see the predatory journals in a more broader perspective, rather than just defining a kind of very specific behavior. We want to see how the predatory journals basically lie in a broad spectrum of quality. So there is high quality journals. There are high quality journals on one side, and there are automatically fraudulent journals on the other side, which we consider as high risk, while the quality journals are low risk. So basically any journal, including the big ones that you know, there is always a risk, because although it's exceptional, sometimes they can also show some kind of predatory behavior that doesn't make them predatory journals, but they show some kind of predatory behavior, but it becomes kind of exceptional or very rare. But if the amount of predatory behavior is increasing, the extent is increasing, then we are going towards the high risk. So we cannot just say that we cannot list a journal as a predatory journal and it remains like that forever, or a quality journal is a quality journal and it remains forever there. If the behavior is changing, then one can go from quality to low quality and so on. Or in some case, although it's rare, there might be a possibility, at least from the low quality journals, to go to the high quality, that's possible, but from fraudulent to deceptive, basically they are hopeless. I'll just say that, because they are usually doing that for money, for profit. So that's not a scholarship. So that's basically it. But in the whole spectrum here, we can have different kinds of journals, from fraudulent to deceptive to unacceptably low quality to low quality, promising low quality, questionable quality, and quality journals. And we have identified some major behaviors of these ones. I'll go a bit into this detail here because Ramon just passed through it. So the high risk and deceptive journals have very typical markers: non-existent or improper peer review and misrepresenting the process by which its articles are selected. They don't tell you how it is peer reviewed. They say, obviously, in one of their pages that it is a peer review process, there is a peer review process, but they don't indicate how it's done. And in most cases, it's not, there is no peer review. They mimic other journals or websites, no or fake editorial board, alternative or fake impact factor. It's just basically something that they themselves generate. They lie about being indexed or members or becoming members of publishing organizations. They hide the cost for publishing, and they are potentially illegal operations in some cases. Basically, they are fraudulent. But sometimes the fraudulent can be deceptive. That means they are not totally fraud, but they are deceptive. Of course, there is a very fine line between the two. So when does a journal become deceptive? Well, when it's lying about its true purpose or misleading authors or readers about the journal status, costs involved, or service provided. Then there are these gray area journals, which we call unacceptably low quality or promising low quality. And the typical markers are the low quality. There is a low quality peer review. Basically, they might send it to one reviewer or even to two reviewers, but they will say, okay, accept or reject without any peer review. Or the peer review basically is about just the structure, the format, and so on, rather than the content. So there is no really rigorous peer review in this case. The breach of good practice, editorial practice, basically, so that sometimes you can find journals where the editor has 3 papers in an issue, or you have a guest editor where he is in most of, or she is in most of the, edited in the published journal, in the published articles rather. So this is not a good practice. This is unethical, basically. And service to authors and academia are lacking or poor. Use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practice, unclear about publishing charges, lack of satisfactory archiving. That means you don't know which one is before the other in their archiving. That means the issues and the volumes and so on. Inactive editorial board. They might have some editorial board, but those editorial boards are there, or members are there just by name. They don't contribute anything to the publication or to the editorial process. When should a journal be considered low quality? Well, the more markers checked in the ones that I listed above, the lower the quality. And the further to the right on the spectrum, the more deserving of support to achieve quality publishing. So if it is a promising low quality, it has to be supported, as we'll see later in the recommendations. And the questionable quality to quality journals, the typical markers are, well, there is a thorough peer review, strong editorial boards, robust system to ensure research integrity and retractions, clear about publishing costs, and occasionally they might engage in predatory practice, but they take proper action when criticized. You might find something there of low quality or of questionable practice in the high quality, high impact factor journals, but whenever that is found out, they take immediate action. So that means these are exceptions. It's not the rule. The behavior or the practice, the predatory behavior or practice is not a rule, but an exception. This is how we can identify a quality journal. So the whole idea here is we should follow a spectrum approach rather than saying, okay, there is a list and that list says this is a predatory journal. Obviously, there is also a list which says in Scopes, for example, or in World of Science, this is a good quality journal. But if the practice is going one way or the other, there is a possibility that they can change the place. One will be in the good, the other will be in the bad. So it should be a spectrum approach rather than saying that this is, predatory or this is good quality, especially when we are in the middle ground here. So that is very, very important to note. And this is the major kind of a shift in the paradigm of understanding of predatory behavior that we considered and recommended in this report or in this study. Well, I'm not going into the detail of the conference here, but we follow exactly the same. So there is a fake or criminal conference to a good quality conference, or some of them can be deceptive, others can be unacceptably low quality, and so on. So we follow the same, and we also have markers of these kinds of conference. So just for the sake of time, I'll pass through this because it is basically the same kind of behaviors, except one is a published article, the other is a conference. So what can you do to minimize your risk? Basically, as a researcher, you in one way or the other are going to be affected by this. At least you receive some emails soliciting for articles. So how do you minimize the risk that you don't go to the low risk journals or you don't publish in low risk journals? So I'm not going to tell you that just go to this list or to that list. The only thing is you should know, you should be aware of the behavior, and you should practice a due diligence. Look for yourselves. That's basically what it is. Rather than just going to a list and so on, of course, they help, definitely, but the lists are not, basically, I would say 100% correct. Because the behavior is becoming more sophisticated, the predatory behavior. Some of the journals even make it to the, let's say, high quality indexers like Scopus and Clarivate and so on. So that's very, very important. So practice due diligence. That means familiarize yourselves with the common and the most reliable traits of predatory practice. If they meet more than 2 of these, the markers that we indicated in the spectrum, this should ring an alarm bell and you should avoid this journal. Use the spectra and other guides. And of course, you can also use the tools out there like we indicated earlier, think, check, submit, and think, check, attend. If a journal claims that it is indexed in a reputable index like Scopus, Web of Science, and so on, check this for yourself. You just don't believe, you don't take it at face value. If it's not true, then avoid that journal. Check if a journal is listed in the directory of open access journal. If it is, the journal is less likely, not 100%, but less likely to be problematic because it has been vetted already. Similarly, if a journal is in a member of COP, that's the Committee on Publication Ethics, where it must follow COP's publication ethics, then it's more likely to be safe. And seek advice from your mentor or supervisor if you are a student, a graduate student, or an early researcher. If they are unsighted themselves, then encourage them to train up. So consider the harm to your academic career and that of your students or team, because if you do that knowingly, then it's going to affect everyone. So stop knowingly publishing in or citing, not only publishing, but citing or citing papers from predatory journals or presenting at a predatory conference. So due diligence is really very important. Here are some very interesting, quotations from the study that we conducted. These are personal experience or accounts. So again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read because this is being recorded, I think, so you can read it for yourselves later, but I'll just maybe read one of them. The experience was bad as I had no option of removing my name from these journals. That means once you are published in a predatory journal, there is no way out. Your name will be always there and that will follow you. So that means you should practice due diligence before publishing in a predatory journal or, let's say, attending a predatory conference. But what can you do to minimize the risks to others? If you are, for example, a research supervisor or mentor, increase your understanding, raise awareness, and practice your own due diligence. If you are an academy member, encourage your academy to mainstream good publishing and conferencing practice and create disincentives to using these fraudulent ones. If you are a head of a higher education institution, introduce publishing and conferencing good practice into continuous professional development. I'll come into a bit of detail in the recommendation. And above all, spread the word. I know there are not many people in this webinar, but for me, even 2 people are good enough. I mean, it's adequate, because if these two people now know about predatory behavior, predatory journals, and they just become an activist in that, saying that just avoid predatory behaviors, that means practice due diligence, that is still enough. So we are already 10 here. If we tell other 10 people, or I mean 2 people each, you can imagine how this can spread. So you have to be an activist on this. It's becoming really a serious problem. Apart from, of course, the more serious ethical things that Ramon discussed, the practical problems or the consequential, as he mentioned, the consequences are really very serious. So it's very important to be on the guard from predatory behaviors or predatory journals and conference. So the conclusions of this this study were many, but we tried to combine them and make them more robust, 8 conclusions, and we also provided specific recommendations for every conclusion, and we indicated that some of them can be practiced with immediate effect, which are marked green here, or in the medium term over the next 6-12 months, that means the last 6-12 months basically after the report, or over longer term, what that means in the coming, let's say, 2-3 years. So the first conclusion is current definitions of predatory academic practice are inadequate, because many people talk about predatory journals or behaviors from different perspectives, and many researchers have their own, specific definitions and so on. So this is inadequate. We found out that the definition that's given is inadequate. So what we recommend is, let's adopt a spectrum approach, the one that I discussed earlier, that recognizes the fluidity of academic publishing and conferencing practice and identifies typical markers along the spectrum, so that we can help researchers choose appropriate journals and minimize their risk. And 2, we can inform future research, debate, and commentary on this practice. So basically the recommendation is, do not rely on imperfect watch and safe list. So this started with Bill, who said there is a blacklist, there is a white list, or there is a good list of journals or a bad list of journals. Some they say this is a watch list, this is a safe list, and so on. But those lists are helpful, obviously, but they are not accurate and they are not perfect. So, there is nothing perfect. Even the spectrum approach is not going to be perfect, but it at least will be more helpful to individual researchers, because they can decide for themselves based on those, markers. And conduct more empirical research on predatory conference, because there is not much on predatory conference. And we also indicated which stakeholders should be involved in that. So again, I'm not going to read or to list all these stakeholders here, but like, for example, for the spectrum approach, that means for the first recommendation, all authors and researchers seeking to publish a paper should be the major stakeholders here. But of course, it could be training providers, publishing, rather publishers, libraries, indexers, and so on. Then the next conclusion is awareness and understanding of predatory practice and behaviors are generally poor. Although there is awareness, as I said, it is still generally poor, especially in the, let's say the global north. Some respondents indicated it as if it is a problem of the global south, or basically the low-income countries. So that is, a lack of awareness. There are these kinds of discrepancies. So that means there is lack of awareness, more, let's say, in the global north, because many researchers believe that they will not be affected by that. So this is very interesting. And this has to be, said clearly. So there is a general awareness, let's say, deficit. So it has to be corrected, basically. So implement robust training on publishing choice, train up supervisors and mentors to research students at all levels, research funders, libraries, and indexers as a mandatory part of their continuous professional development. Then the third conclusion is predatory practices are becoming more sophisticated, and fraudulent journals can find their way into trusted indexes, as I said. So share experience of tackling predatory journals and conference, and develop common tools, develop a governance mechanism. So this is more, let's say, to the stakeholders, which are institutions, and obviously there could be certifying an academic conference, events quality, or an equivalent to a flow chart for the predatory journals. The fourth conclusion is predatory practices are growing, impacting at least 1 million researchers and costing billions in wasted research. So this is also a major economic problem. It's not only a moral question, it is also an economic, a practical question here. So lead a renewed and concerted cross-sectoral global effort, or explore the value of establishing a global nonprofit accreditation body. So one of the things is, although we have scopes, although we have World of Science and so on, basically these are also for profit. They are, non-private entities. So the question is, should we have a kind of a global non-profit accreditation body rather than a profit body? So that was a very major discussion in the study, but one of the recommendations we came up with is that it is good, or at least we need to explore a way for establishing a global non-profit accreditation body, which could be hosted somewhere like UNESCO, which is the right institution in the UN, because that is mandated with education and research, of course, scientific research. Then the fifth conclusion is predatory practice risk becoming ingrained in research culture and can be institutionalized. This is very, very serious. So embed institutional process to promote good practice, like, because this will help us to safeguard the integrity of the journals and the conference. Adopt due diligence mechanisms within academic institutions for mentoring and supervision. Provide disincentives for repeat offenders. For example, if there are people who are repeatedly publishing in a predatory journal or participating in a conference, then they should be, refuse to be appointed, promoted, or to get funding from the funding organizations. And conduct more research on the impacts of predatory practice and on predatory conference in particular. Then the sixth recommendation is the commercialization and monetization of academic research is a major driver of predatory practice and behavior. So this is basically the root cause. The predatory behaviors are proliferating because they get profit out of it. So these are basically there because they got money. So if you monetize or commercialize the research enterprise or academic research specifically, then it is going to also generate some interest from the predatory enterprise out there. So we need to promote open, inclusive global discussion on how to work together to transition to a low-cost, sustainable, online, and less profit-driven model of academic publishing. Well, this is a very broad field by itself, so I'm not going into the open access or the models of open access publishing, but at least we have to come up with a kind of more open, more inclusive kind of open access publishing. And where practicable, establish, strengthen, and subsidize low-cost academic publishing house owned by universities, academics, and professional societies or their consortia, and promote non-commercial models of journal indexing and publishing, or replace the author pays or pay-to-publish model with alternative economic models of open access models, so that the monetization and the commercialization will not be a problem, a driver for predatory behavior. And finally, but one, research evaluation assessment is a major driver. In addition to the monetization, the other root cause is the research evaluation or assessment, and that has to be also overhauled. So stigmatize fraudulent and unacceptably low quality publications presented for research assessment or promotion at the level of stigmatizing plagiarism. So when people are caught with plagiarized material, they are very much stigmatized. So our recommendation is we have to go as far as stigmatizing research that's published in fraudulent, specifically in fraudulent and unacceptably low quality publications, and disqualify applications which include these publications for example, for promotion, appointment, and so on. Support well-intentioned low-quality journals. As I said, some low-quality journals can have the potential to become good quality journals, but they have to be supported. And this is specifically true in some universities in the low-income countries where they have a good intention, they have a journal established, but it doesn't have the quality because of the low quality of the editorial board, or lack of money, or lack of funding, and so on, or lack of good reviewers, peer reviewers. So these have to be supported, because their intention is not basically to get money, but to publish their research. But still, if the practice is not at high level, obviously they still will remain low quality journals. So there is a need for supporting them instead of just forgetting them. Then advocate for responsible research assessment. This is very important amongst research funders. That means quality, not quantity of published papers has to be considered. That means the overall impact of your research must be taken into consideration rather than the number of publications that you have out there. Or remove financial incentives for publishing papers, because many researchers are also publishing in low quality or sometimes in predatory journals because they get money for the paper they publish. So this puts a pressure also, or a kind of makes an incentive for publishing in low quality journals. Researchers they fund must publish in journals with clear evidence of peer review. That's for funders. And reviewing any requirements for mandatory conference attendance and earmarked funding in grant allocations, specifically for conference. And overall, the funding, recruitment, promotion, recognition.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you please, to wrap up, because
that's my last.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and this is very important recommendation. That means the quality of research, as I said, should be considered rather than the quantity of research when we are dealing with promotions, appointment, and so on. And finally, the lack of transparency and capacity of the peer review process, together with the lack of professional recognition of peer reviewers, are a further driver of predatory practice. Meaning, if peer review is not encouraged because there's an additional work, then there will be less, quality peer review. That means there will be more predatory behavior. So we need to recognize the peer review in the level of recognizing a review article. So that's one of the specific recommendations. And we also said that we need to promote transparent peer reviewing, where the peer review report is published along with the paper itself. So these are basically the results of the study. I hope I gave you some idea on how this predatory behavior is becoming more important, and how, the research enterprise and the publishing enterprise is responding to this. And the report is available online. I'll also send Ivan the frequently asked questions, where we put many questions and give answers to the specific questions, and also an infographic which summarized the presentation that I gave here. But you can find the report, the full report, in this link here. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Asfa. Regarding this information about the inter-academic partnership, I think the link is in the website. You can find it on the website where you found the information about this webinar. And now, well, most of the people already left. It was a bit over time, but perhaps some people will watch the webinar offline. So I don't know if you want to discuss anything, or Camille, that is also here. You have some. Oh, no, someone else is joining for the Q&A. It was a very interesting webinar, Ramon and Asfa. I will let the others, if they have any question. If not, I would like to make some comments about what you mentioned, and some to leave some messages that they are recorded. I don't know if Adriana or Camille have any question, any comment. As editor of a rising journal, Camille, do you have any comment?
So I'm not. Hi everyone, thank you very much for these presentations. Yeah, I'm not editor, but I co-founded a Diamond Open Access journal in my field, and so I'm quite familiar with these questions, and I was very interested in what Asfa presented as conclusions, like short-term but also long-term ways to move away from these predatory practices. And of course, the funding, but also the way we assess research, the way we are transparent, and the way we should push for quality above else is very important and quite hard to move away from in situations where we are fighting for fundings for research positions, and also we're always repeating the same thing, I feel. But it's always good to hear from different perspectives.
So, well, I don't know if Adriana wants to add anything. If not, I would like to emphasize a couple of messages of both of you. Well, I really appreciate that you both participated. The more ethical point of view from Ramón was very interesting, because you put you comment on something that sometimes when we are talking about publishing in academia, we forget. Is like it's not only about our own career or the relation with our peers. That these unethical practices in, well, whatever you consider unethical, either faking data or publishing in a predatory journal to increase your CV, undermine the trust of the society in science. That this is a basic question that often is overlooked. We are only thinking about our own benefit or how to take these shortcuts, but these practices, like this low quality science, undermine the trust of the society. And besides, we are using an enormous amount of public resources, where I mean, science basically is funded with public money, as Camille also mentioned. And in Spain, it's a very clear case that we are not talking about low and middle income countries, because sometimes, as Asfa mentioned, we think that they are more vulnerable of these practices, but Spain was not vulnerable. Basically, the Spanish research system adopted these editorials, was the main contributor in some of them, basically because they, I don't know, I mean, this culture of publish or perish. They found that it was the best way to meet the requirements of publications required by several science agencies in Spain. So that is an example how these kind of practices can undermine the trust in society, but also can waste an enormous amount of public money. And talking about the early career researchers, I personally noticed that some of these predatory journals, they are able to attract more senior researchers, sometimes very well established with very good reputation in the field, and they use these people as a magnet, because they kind of wash the perception of the entire community using these people. Like, these people is supporting us, is publishing with us, so the people perceive these publishers or journals as more legitimate. So it's very dangerous. As I said, we should really be activists and reject all these kind of practices, because they have whatever we do with them, they have an impact on the impact is multiplying the entire community. And I really like all the practical guidelines given very detailed by Asfa, all the tools, how to identify. And my take-home message is that the wide spectrum that is the number of publishers and journals is multiplying as we are speaking, because this is a very profitable sector, and everybody wants to their piece of cake. And this is not. Things are not black or white. There is a wide spectrum of quality of predatory practices. So we really need to pay attention on that. Well, thanks everybody. Those who had to leave, well, they will find the recorded webinar in our website, in the Pages website. Thanks to all of you who attended. And I would like to just to leave with these last messages about the ethical and the guidelines, how to identify these unethical practices. And thank you everybody, and I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Ivan.
Bye.
And bye, everyone.
Thanks, Ivan.
Yeah.